This whole time Richard Nixon is going to bring an honorable end to the Vietnam War, but he has not really disclosed how, because he doesn't want to upset the peace talks that are going on between North and South Vietnam. And you have to remember that of all the things that President Nixon inherited from the Johnson administration, this was by far the biggest headache for him, okay? And as I mentioned to you before, he didn't get this taken care of quickly, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, because there are more names on the Vietnam Wall that you saw during the Nixon administration than there was from the Johnson administration. So you got to kind of keep that in mind. Often Johnson gets blamed for it, but you can see the difference. Now, not only did Nixon have problems outside the United States with the war itself, he also had tremendous problems inside the United States with the protesters of the war, which was really a major, major headache for him as well. So the biggest exterior problem he inherited was the war itself. The biggest interior problem that he inherited were these continued protests against the war, which basically tore Americans apart. People that supported the military versus those that did not. Younger people versus older people. And when we see that miniseries, the 60s, you'll see the generation gap in that very well. Now in the summer of 1969, Nixon finally made his two-part plan for Vietnam public to the American people. And that was in the summer of 1969. He decided to disclose what his plan was. Now, let me ask you a question, see if you can figure this out. You don't want to just race out of Vietnam and leave the South Vietnamese cold. I mean, because they're just going to get crushed. But if you want to get out of Vietnam without just sticking everything on the South Vietnamese, what might you do? What might be his two-part plan? What's he going to do? And a lot of this he's doing to try to quiet the protesting in the United States. What's he going to do? We're in there full-fledged. What two things might he do to stop the... How do you stop the protesting in the United States?
Stop sending.
Reduce them out.
Very good. He's going to gradually withdraw troops out. He's not going to pull them out all at the same time. Very good. He's going to gradually return them. When you gradually return them, less are getting killed. When less are getting killed, less people are protesting. Yes, my dear?
How did he choose which ones were coming home?
I think they went by length of service. Yeah, length of service. So the plan, first part of the plan called for the gradual withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam. He's going to gradually take them out, so many at a time. And he would announce that publicly. We're going to withdraw 25,000 troops by this day. We're going to withdraw another 10,000 troops by this day. That, he hoped, would quiet the protesting, because troops coming home, one thing, less deaths, another. What else might you do? Because you're still fighting there. What would your strategy be?
For the South Vietnamese one.
Well, they already have as many as they need. But what might you do to save American lives, but you still are there in the war?
Have the South Vietnamese trained better?
No, that's a good thought, but they're all fully trained. But how are you going to keep from Americans getting killed if you're in a war?
Stop going on that.
What?
Stop going on
Yes!
Yay.
They're going to start fighting a defensive war. They're only going to engage the enemy when they have to defend themselves. So they no longer going to try to gain ground or try to win. They're going to try to hold service until they can get these servicemen out. Does that make sense? And that's what his plan was. Number one, the gradual withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam, and number two, he stated he would only fight the enemy on the defensive. I'm not sure, in all the years I've taught that, some kid came up with that.
Heck yeah,
Yeah,
man.
that was good. Now, and again, these two things in Nixon's mind were going to quiet these protesters and this protesting that was going on across the country. That's his plan, okay? We'll get back to that to see how well it works a little bit later. Now, our next subtopic, you got to get yourself a little organized, because I kind of went ahead of myself. The next subtopic is 1969, events that shook the media. You've already got the first two, Senator Edward Kennedy and the events of Chappaquiddick, right? And you also got the moon landing, right? Those are the first two. So get wherever you put those in your notes, that's kind of where they need to be now, is in this particular place, okay? Well, yeah, I don't know. pull them out. I don't know how you did that, but just keep in mind that those have already been given to you. So where we're going is the third event that shook the media, and that was Charles Manson, the Manson family, and 2 brutal murders. Okay, Charles Manson, the Manson family, and 2 brutal murder scenes is what it really should say.
What was Charles Manson? That sounds really familiar.
I'll tell you, you'll know all about him pretty quick. So Charles Manson, the Manson family, and 2 brutal murder scenes.
Is this the guy who had the tattoo on his face? Like he had something on his forehead, like
He had-
upside down cross?
He had a swastika
Yes.
carved into
Yeah.
his forehead.
Okay, no, that's what.
Not until he got to jail.
Isn't he like crazy or something?
Well, you decide. Here we go. You tell me. Okay, on the evening of August 9th, 1969, on the evening of August 9th, 1969, and these are on your ID sheet, at 1005 Cielo Drive in Beverly Hills, California, 5 people were found brutally murdered. On the evening of August 9th, 1969, at 10050 Cielo Drive in Beverly Hills, California, 5 people were found brutally murdered. The home at 10050 Cielo Drive in Beverly Hills, California belonged to an actress by the name of Sharon Tate and her husband, Roman Polanski. Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate. That's who the home belonged to. Polanski will come up later in discussion, but he's on your ID sheet. So the residence at 10050 Cielo Drive
It's on the other one.
belonged to actress Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski. Polanski was not there, and the people murdered were Sharon Tate and 4 of her guests that she was entertaining that evening. So the murder victims were Sharon Tate and 4 of her guests that she was entertaining that evening. This was a horrific murder scene. Tate and her guests were either shot or stabbed to death in a brutal and bizarre murder. Tate and her guests were shot or stabbed to death in a brutal and bizarre murder. Here were her guests. Abigail Folger. Does that ring a bell, Folger?
Yeah.
Like the coffee?
Coffee heiress. Her family owned the Folger Coffee Company. Very wealthy. Abigail Folger, age 25, a wealthy coffee heiress. Heiress is A-I-R-E-S. 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 Second person killed, second guest, was Wojtek Frykowski. He was simply Folger's male companion, boyfriend, whatever. Wojtek Frykowski, Folger's male companion. Steve Parent, an 18-year-old friend of the property caretaker. Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Steve Parent, an 18-year-old friend of the property caretaker. That's a person that takes care of the property, self-explanatory. But and the final victim was Jay Sebring, who was the top men's hairstylist in the United States. Now that's kind of strange to you, but that was kind of a big deal back in this time. Men started to style their hair in, different ways, and he was one of the top men's hairstylists in the United States. And then also Sharon Tate was murdered as well. Let me give you an example of how these people were murdered. Let's start with Stephen Parent, a Again, 18-year-old friend of the caretaker.
Steven or Steve?
Stephen or Steve Parent, either one. He was shot 4 times with a .22 caliber gun. He was shot in his car as he arrived at the Tate residence. He was absolutely in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had just driven up to visit his friend, was in his car. He was shot 4 times at point blank range with a .22. He got off easy, frankly. Abigail Folger was found on the lawn outside the residence. She was stabbed 28 times. Any one of them probably to kill her. Stabbed 28 times. Abigail Folger was stabbed 28 times and was found on the lawn outside of the residence. Wojtek Frykowski was shot twice, stabbed 51 times, and the hit in the head estimated 13 times with the butt of a revolver. Can't think of a more horrible death. Well, from the
13
forensics.
times, you said?
Yep. He was shot twice, he was stabbed 51 times, and he was hit in the head repeatedly. They estimated from the forensics at least 13 times with the butt of the revolver. He was also found on the lawn outside the residence.
How do you have many stabs with
Jay Sebring was shot once and stabbed 7 times. Jay Sebring was shot once and stabbed 7 times.
Same person did all this?
We'll get to that.
Where was he found?
Inside the home. Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant.
Oh.
So she was stabbed 5 times in both the chest and the back, and 11 more times to various parts of her body. Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, was stabbed 5 times in the chest and back, and 11 more times to various parts of her body.
You have to get one more time.
Yep, she was 8 months pregnant. She was stabbed 5 times in the chest and back, and 11 more times to various parts of her body. A nylon rope was around her neck, which left rope burns, and the rope extended over a rafter that they had thrown the end of the rope over a rafter on the ceiling.
Stab her?
Not yet. So a nylon rope was around her neck, which left rope burns on her neck, which means there was some pressure on that. And the rope, the end of it extended over a rafter. On the other end of the rope was tied to Sebring's neck. The other end of the rope, after it was over the rafters, was tied around Sebring's neck. And her unborn son also died in the brutal murders. This was unbelievable. Like, can you imagine the size? I'm not even done yet.
What was this for?
I'm going to tell you. The victims at the Tate residence were stabbed a total of 102 times during this brutal killing spree. No weapons were found in the area or in the house. No weapons at all. So they were stabbed a total of 102 times and no weapons found in the crime scene. However, the killers left a calling card. Left a calling card. This is unbelievable. The word pig was smeared in Sharon Tate's blood on a door. The word pig was smeared in Sharon Tate's blood on a door. The bodies were discovered by an employee of the Tates the next morning who immediately called the police. bodies were discovered by an employee of the Tates, and you're walking in on that. And they immediately called the police. The only one on the grounds that survived the murderous actions were the caretaker, William Garretson. He was the only one survived, William Garretson. Why did he survive?
He did.
Never found him. He didn't even, well, we'll get into that. This is an unbelievable story. He was just 19 years old. He was asleep because they had a boarding house for him that he stayed in. He didn't hear anything. He was asleep during the killings. And when he was interviewed by police, he said he didn't hear one thing all night. And he became an instant suspect, as you might imagine. And he was later arrested for the murder, but they set him free because he really did not have anything to do with it. But I mean, you're the only survivor, you don't hear a thing. People are murdered in this fashion. He was an immediate suspect. He was arrested, but he was eventually set free.
How long was he in jail for?
Not very long, just hours. Mrs. Tate's husband is a movie director by the name of Roman Polanski, and he was out of the country during the murders. He was over in England working, doing his thing. So he was out of the country during the murders, and my God, can you imagine coming back to that? Roman Polanski, yeah.
Why does that mean something like
Well, he's still, he's a movie director in an age still alive today.
this? What did she direct?
Didn't Gerald Manson just recently die?
He did. We're gonna tell you all.
Just like a few years ago?
Yeah, we're gonna tell you. Oh, we're gonna tell you the whole story. Yeah.
In one
Well,
class period?
Well, no.
I was like,
Right away, rumors started that these killings were a result of a drug deal gone bad, because drugs were found at the Tate residence by investigators that were linked to both Frykowski and Folger. Okay, so right away, people thought this was a drug deal gone bad. Okay, so rumors surfaced around the area in Beverly Hills that this was a drug hit, so to speak. Drugs were found at the Tate residence after the murders by investigators. Those drugs were later linked to both Frykowski and Folger. And of course, the finger started pointing at Polanski and Tate as well. And when Polanski was interviewed, he adamantly denied that the murders were drug-related. He said he and his wife never took drugs, especially would never do that because she was pregnant. So he denied to the end that her husband, that there was any, Roman Polanski denied that there was no drug use on the part of his wife or him. They didn't have drugs because they just didn't take them, and they certainly wouldn't take them with the wife being pregnant. Wow. The next day, on August 10th, 1969, another set of murders occurred 10 miles away from the Tate murders. The next night, August 10th, 1969, another set of murders occurred about 10 miles away from the Tate murders. And the people that were murdered in this gruesome event were a grocery executive by the name of Lino Labianca and his wife, Rosemary. So the two people murdered on August 10th, 1969 were grocery executive Lino Labianca and his wife, Rosemary. What's a grocery executive? Kent Folger owns a chain of grocery stores, right?
Not anymore.
Well, did he sell them?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the point being, he would be kind of a grocery executive. He did own several stores. This guy was bigger than that. He owned many, many stores. Okay? Now, listen to this. Listen to this. Obviously, police wondered if he had any enemies. Why would somebody kill you? Friends described him as a very quiet, conservative person, well-liked by all. Mrs. Labianca was a very attractive 38-year-old woman of Hispanic origin. She met her husband in the 1940s. The couple had 2 children, grown at that time. The Labiancas were stabbed a total of 67 times. Mrs. Labianca 41 times, Lino Labianca 26 times. 41 times. So the Labiancas were also stabbed to death, a total of 67 times between the two. Mrs. Labianca was stabbed 41 times, Lino Labianca was stabbed 26 times. The scene surrounding Mr. Labianca was incredibly gruesome. And I'll give you some details. This is what the scene looked around. First of all, Lino Labianca was in his pajamas. It was late at night. When they found him, he was lying on the floor with a pillow cover over his head. A cord was wrapped around his neck and his hands were tied behind him. So he's lying on the residence floor with the pillow cover over his head. A cord was wrapped around his neck and his hands were tied behind him. Anybody know what a carving fork is?
Yeah.
It's a fork used like at Thanksgiving. Big fork, yeah. A carving fork protruded from his stomach. It stabbed him with a carving fork. This is other than the 60 or 26 other times he was stabbed. The word war was carved in his flesh. These are brutal. The word war was carved in his flesh. A knife was lodged in his neck. These are some serious killers, man. So he's lying on the residence floor with the pillow cover over his head, a cord's wrapped around his neck, his hands tied behind him. A carving fork protrudes from his stomach. The word war is carved in his flesh, and a knife is lodged in his neck. Mrs. Labianca is lying on the floor. Her nightgown was pulled up over her head, and then had a pillowcase over that over her head, and they had a lamp cord from the residence tied around her neck. I mean, you have to think about stuff like this. It's just crazy. So she's lying on the floor, her nightgown was pulled over the top of her head, they put a pillowcase over the top of her head, and then wrapped it with a light cord from a light fixture.